My name is Tim Cumming. I'm a communications specialist with the Ausable Bayfield Conservation. I'm also a proud member of the South Huron Climate Committee. I've been very lucky over the past 16 years to work in South Huron and to volunteer here and to work with amazing people in this community who are making some really positive changes. I'm very pleased today to introduce Ian Jean, Forestry and Land Stewardship Specialist with the Ausable Bayfield Conservation. And Ian is going to speak on trees, stewardship, and preparing for the future. Ian is going to give us some ideas for some of the actions you can take from tree planting to stewardship with grant support and staff support to help you make the changes that are going to help South Huron prepare for these extreme weather events, these storms, and further continued change to our climate.
My name is Ian Jean and I'm the Forestry Specialist with the Ausable Bayfield Conservation Authority. Today I'm where I like to be most. I'm in the forest to talk to you about climate change in South Huron, some of the impacts that we are predicting for our forests and our trees with the changing climate, and some of the ways in which our trees and our forests can help us to mitigate climate change and the climate change impacts. When we talk about sequestering carbon, what we mean is capturing carbon or taking carbon out of the atmosphere and then storing it in a more permanent form. So trees do this through photosynthesis. They take carbon dioxide directly out of the air into their leaves, and through photosynthesis they release oxygen and incorporate that carbon into the living tissue of the tree. So trees are actually 50% carbon by dry weight. So if you took all the water out of the tree and weighed it, 50% of that tree is carbon. Carbon in trees and in forests is stored in the living stem wood, the above ground portion of the tree, and in the soils. Okay. There is carbon in the leaf litter and in the shrub and the small tree layer, but it's mostly in the large trees and the soils. And you can see in the forest soils, it's pretty much what you see above ground in terms of branches is occurring below ground. You have the same mass of roots, mostly within the top 18 inches of the soil. As the leaf litter and the trees themselves decay, that carbon gets pulled into the soil and is stored there for a long time. So those are our key carbon storage areas within the trees and the forests. The other aspect of trees that make them very, very significant for carbon sequestration is they're very large. Okay, so trees, because they're big, store a large amount of carbon, and they live a long time. So in our area, trees in a healthy forest will live between 100 and 300 years. So that's 3 or 4 generations from now, a tree that we plant today will still be sequestering and storing carbon. Trees themselves are very important for carbon sequestration. We couldn't build a better machine to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide, of course, is one of our key greenhouse gases that is causing climate change that we're seeing today and predicted for the future. Our trees are carbon sequestration machines, and our forests are carbon sequestration factories and warehouses. What we're expecting is a longer growing season and higher temperatures. However, the trees that are growing here in our forest today are very likely most likely adapted to the current conditions. So it's uncertain as to whether being adapted to the current conditions they would be able to capitalize on those longer growing seasons and increasing temperatures. Some of the other predictions are suggesting that because the trees are adapted to current conditions under warmer conditions and potentially wetter or drier conditions, the trees may be less adapted to those conditions and there'll be increasing levels of stress. The other thing we are likely to see is new pests or greater severity of pests as our growing season and our temperatures increase, and also new invasive species that will stress our forests. We have to prepare for the possibility of decline in tree health and vigor and decline in forest health and vigor. important thing we can do for carbon storage and climate change mitigation is to conserve and retain our existing forest cover. The worst thing we can do is to clear forests and convert them to other land uses. The most efficient way of storing carbon on the landscape is in our forests, so we have to retain those. The next important thing we can do is to plant new trees and new forests. That will increase our carbon storage capacity. The other thing we can do with our forests is to manage them sustainably to produce wood products. So those wood products also store carbon while they're being used. In a sustainable managed forest, that forest continues to sequester and store carbon. And also the wood products can displace other building materials or other materials like plastic, steel, or concrete that actually create more carbon emissions in their manufacture and use. Those three things are the most important: conserve the existing forests, plant trees, and then sustainable management of forests to produce wood products. To further, I guess, enhance our climate change mitigation potential, we want to plant those trees so that they connect existing forests and allow for migration of seeds and trees that will be necessary under climate change. Some models predict the optimal conditions for a tree will move several hundred kilometers to the north. Trees themselves can't move, only the seeds can move, or the pollen can move. Under natural conditions, it's estimated that trees can move 50 kilometers a century, whereas climate change models predict the trees might have to move several hundred kilometers in the next century. When we're planting trees, we can assist tree migration by planting trees from southern seed sources further north. And I'm not suggesting we switch all of our tree planting over to species that aren't found here today. Suggesting more so is that we use a portion of southern tree genetics in our tree plantings that we do today. So for instance, red oak, which grows all the way from Alabama to North Bay. When we're planting trees in South Huron, what I would suggest we consider is planting red oak. Maybe a portion of our red oak seed comes from, say, Essex County or Windsor, and we plant those trees here today as a proportion. And that way we help increase biodiversity and move some of those potentially more adapted trees into our region so they can mix with the existing trees and improve the situation under the climate change that we are expecting. We're really fortunate in this part of Ontario in South Huron. We have over 50 native tree species that grow naturally. So yeah, we are well positioned from that respect, but we have to encourage and nurture that diversity in our tree planting and in our forest management as well. When we're managing forests, manage for multiple species. Native species are adapted to the local soil conditions and the local climate, and a lot of our native species have very wide ranges, have great adaptive capacity even given climate change. For instance, trees like red maple that grow here, beech, their natural range extends to northern Florida. Things like red oak, to southern Alabama, and even white pine grows into northern Georgia. So a lot of our trees possess great genetic variability, very likely have some capacity for adaptability. We want to look to those native species because we don't know how well things are going to adapt. We don't know what the next pest is on the horizon. Diversity is one of our key tools to build adaptability and resilience on our landscape. Windbreaks capture and store carbon, of course, in the tree itself, which is important. But of even greater importance to climate change is windbreaks reduce soil erosion. So we talked about in forests how carbon is stored primarily in the trees and in the soil, and on farms, because carbon is captured mostly on the crops, and the above ground portion of the crop is mostly consumed, the most important storage area is the soil. And windbreaks help with that because they reduce soil erosion. So they reduce erosion of the topsoil layer that contains most of the organic matter, which contains the carbon storage on the farm. So windbreaks are important for that reason. Windbreaks also help with climate change adaptation by providing corridors. So a windbreak corridor between forests or along a water course, they allow for movement of tree seeds and tree pollen and migration of trees that may be necessary. You can use windbreaks to increase biodiversity. So the most commonly planted trees in a windbreak are conifers, usually spruce or cedar or pine, but you can incorporate shrubs and other tree species within that windbreak sporadically to enhance the diversity. Before planting, it's important to have the site properly prepared. So if your fence row field edge area has existing grass cover, you want to get in there and prepare the site ahead of the planting. So you actually want to eliminate that grass cover in the area where you're going to plant the tree. So in this case, for this windbreak, what was done was just a spot application of herbicide in advance of planting to eliminate that competition. This grass competition is very difficult for establishing trees. This grass will pull a huge amount of water out of the soil because what you have below ground, this is good for climate change, is a thick network of roots, but it's bad for establishing trees because those roots and the vegetation takes the water away from the tree. So here we did a spot application of a herbicide to eliminate the grass, and then we planted the tree, and this is really great afterwards. Afterwards you have to control the competition too to have successful tree establishments. So in this case, the landowner went around and put wood chips around each of these trees. The wood chips help to hold the soil moisture, and they'll also in turn increase organic matter as they decay, and that's all for the benefit of this tree growth. Some of the common questions I get when people are asking about planting windbreaks is what should I plant, and then how far apart should I plant them. So for windbreaks, because you want that winter protection and a winter function, your evergreens obviously are your more common species, and spruce and cedar are the most common, but white pine as well can be used. With respect to spacing, it kind of depends a little bit on what you're trying to achieve. For like a farm field windbreak, you do want some porosity. You want 30 to 50% porosity. That gives you a greater windbreak benefit further into the field because of the turbulence that's created by that porosity, and it also allows some airflow, which is beneficial for a lot of the crops. To get 30 to 50% porosity on a pine or a spruce, you want the trees spaced, between 10 and 15 feet apart. So right here in this particular windbreak, the trees are spaced 10 feet apart. You might want closer spacing around buildings or areas where you're actually trying to create a wind wall. Spacing 10 feet or closer for spruce will give you more of a wind wall. For cedar, cedar is a more dense tree to begin with, and it possesses less natural porosity. So between farm fields, you want to go probably 6 to 10 feet apart to get some porosity. As a wind wall, you can go as close as 3 feet apart for cedar, and you get that desired wind blocking effect. Other species can be incorporated into windbreaks to enhance diversity. Sometimes we use maple or oak, and we put it in every 8 or 10 trees just to break things up. That still allows the windbreak to function because you get good growth in the conifers between those trees with that added diversity within the row. And the other way that you can add diversity and other benefits for pollinators and wildlife is through addition of shrubs. You can do that within the row or just offset from the row. A lot of people ask me, is one row better or 2 rows better? And again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Strictly for wind protection and erosion, soil erosion in the field, really one row is all that's required. It gives you the desired porosity, the desired effect. Of course, if you use multiple rows, that's beneficial where you're trying to create a wind wall, such as around buildings, or if one of your objectives is to provide diversity of habitat. 2 rows or 3 rows or more is beneficial for those functions. Cover crops can be used, and they can be planted after wheat and within some of the other crop rotations, so that there's more plants growing on the field and capturing carbon for a longer time throughout the year, and then that carbon is again stored in the roots and incorporated into that soil and stored for the long term. We do have a certified crop advisor on staff, And there's many local crop advisor consultants you could work with that can help you implement some of those practices on your farm. Enhancing and increasing the amount of carbon in our soils is going to be important for climate change mitigation in South Huron. And there's a host of other benefits as well. Soils with higher organic matter content, they infiltrate water better, they store water better, so reduces drought stress on the crops, and they also increase nutrient holding capacity and nutrient availability. We all can play a part, even in our own backyards, in climate change mitigation and just increasing tree cover in general, which has a number of benefits. Find a spot in your yard, on your property, to plant a tree, plant a few trees. Every tree counts in climate change mitigation, in habitat. Things like shade and aesthetic beauty can't be dismissed. I know some of the things I value most about my own property are the big trees that someone planted, you know, when the house was built 100 years ago. We're enjoying those trees now, and I continue to plant trees on the property so that in the future other people can enjoy them as well. I look for opportunities to plant a tree. And if you don't have your own property, you know, when things roll around back to normal, there's opportunities to plant trees in the community. We quite often have community tree planting events and take part in those. We can all participate in different ways. Of course, everybody wants to know how much it's going to cost, right? That's important for budgeting, and it can vary. You can establish a windbreak fairly inexpensively using smaller bare root seedlings, for instance. And if you do the planting yourself, the seedling cost is going to be anywhere from $1 to $2 a tree. So at 10 to 12 foot spacing, you're going to need 300 trees for a full length of a farm, and so you can do it, you know, between $300 and $600. You could plant your windbreak. That's if you're planting small seedlings, planting them yourself. Of course, as you get into larger trees, or if you're hiring somebody to do the planting, it's going to cost you more. It could cost several $1,000s sometimes. That's why there are those incentive programs through Huron Clean Water, through Ontario Soil and Crop, and other provincial and federal funding that comes up from time to time. That's to provide cost share and to reduce the burden of the landowner, because recognizing that these trees have benefit to the broader society, right? Through climate change mitigation, erosion control, cleaner water, wildlife habitat, all those benefits that trees provide. So there are programs, and that's part of what we're here to help you with, is to access those programs, because they can change from time to time. But we piece them together for you. So the cost, you know, for most farm field windbreaks, we can get 50% up to 75% covered. That's currently, as I said, it can change, and you can adjust those costs based on the size of trees you use and how much work you want to do yourself. So we can usually establish trees into almost any budget. That's part of what we ask when we're out to meet with clients, and part of the things that we work through when we're developing the plan. Don't hesitate. Please pick up the phone, send an email to us or to one of the other groups, and we're happy to help. That's what we're here for, and that's what we enjoy doing, is working with our clients to help see their projects from start to finish.